Johann Sebastian Bach was born into a musical family of Bachs in 1685. By age 10, both of his parents were dead, and in his early friction-filled life, Johann determined that he was going to write music, and he did, but he wanted to write his music for the glory of God. Most of Bach's work actually are explicitly biblical. At age 17, Bach became the organist at church, and shortly after, he was actually given charge of his entire music ministry at that church. And during his ministry in Germany, he wrote a new cantata every month. Every month, he wrote a new cantata. And during one 3-year period, he actually wrote, conducted, orchestrated, and performed with his choir and orchestra a new cantata every week. No one had any idea what a mark Bach would leave, but his legacy lives on some 300 years later, and you can hear his music anytime you want now. But at the end of every original manuscript of Bach's, you'll find the letters SDG, SDG, and those letters stand for Soli Deo Gloria, which means to the glory of God. See, Bach wanted all of his music to be for the glory of God. Soli Deo Gloria. This phrase was actually one of 5 solae that the reformers during the Protestant Reformation came up with to summarize their basic beliefs during the Reformation. And so, as a doctrine, Soli Deo Gloria means that everything that is done for God's glory, to the exclusion of mankind's self-glorification and pride. They wanted everything they do and everything they did to be motivated solely by the glory of God. All the glory to God alone. And so I want to talk to you today about the glory of God. We talk about the glory of God a lot in church, right? But as much as we talk about it, I think it's important that we really understand and get a grasp on what it is that we're actually talking about. So what is the glory of God? Well, let's talk about that today. First of all, though, let me say that I think trying to define the glory of God, this infinite creator God, trying to define his glory with feeble human words is probably nearly impossible. But, as I said, it's important that we understand what it is. So this morning I'm going to do my best to kind of define it and explain it as best I can. But in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 3, Isaiah actually writes of angels proclaiming, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." See, God is perfectly holy. His holiness is what sets him apart. That's what the term holy means, is set apart. God's holiness is what sets him apart. He is in a class of his own. His holiness is his infinite perfection, his infinite worth. It is everything that he is as God that nobody else is, his holiness. And these angels, they say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his." And you might expect them to say holiness, but they don't. They say glory. The whole earth is full of his glory. John Piper defines the glory of God like this. He says that the glory of God is the manifest beauty of his holiness. It is the going public of his holiness. See, the glory of God is his holiness on display. It's his holiness on display throughout the world. Everything that exists is designed to glorify God. Psalm 19, verse 1. Let me give you an example. "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of his hands." I don't know if you realize this, but there's a lot more to the universe than just Earth. And there's actually, when it comes to the universe, Earth really isn't the big dog on the block, if you will. But actually, the largest star that we have discovered, I say we like I had something to do with it, but I sit under a telescope all the time. No, but the largest star that man has discovered is Canis Majoris. Okay, and I think we have a picture of it, yeah. Canis Majoris. This is the largest star that we know of. It is 4,892 light years away from Earth. I don't know, a light year is the amount of time it takes light to travel over a year's time, and 4,892 light years away. But get this, okay? You think, like our sun is way bigger than the Earth. I don't know if you can see, there's a little bitty dot down here on the right. That's our sun in comparison to Canis Majoris, the largest star we know of. If you think that the Earth is big, you can fit 7 quadrillion Earths inside Canis Majoris. Wow. I don't know about you, but this makes me feel pretty small. But that's how big God is. And this same God who created Canis Majoris, the largest star we know of, somewhere on one of those 7 quadrillion Earths is you and me. Very, very small. You probably couldn't even draw a dot on here to represent the size in comparison, but somewhere is you and me, and the same God who created this holds you in his hand. He loves you. He cares for you. And that's amazing to me. But that's how big God is. These enormous stars he created, these endless galaxies, the billions of stars, we've only been able to see just a small portion of what's out there. But all of it exists to show us just a glimpse of how great God is. It all exists to display his glory. That's why Psalm says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The expanse proclaims the work of his hands. In Isaiah 46, verses 6 and 7, it says this, God says, I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from far away and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who bears my name and is created from my glory, I have formed them indeed. I have made them. See, everything that exists to bring him glory, and that includes us. Look at Romans 9:23. It says, and what if he did this to make known the riches of his glory on objects of mercy that he prepared beforehand for glory? From the beginning, when God formed man in his image, his purpose in doing this was for his glory. Everything that exists to bring him glory. Westminster Shorter Catechism answers the question, what is the chief end of man? And it says that the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. That is our purpose, to glorify God. So how do we do this? How do we glorify God? I want to look at Exodus today, and if you're there in chapter 33, I'm going to kind of skim through a few parts of chapters 33 and 34, but before we read, I'm just going to kind of set the story for you a little bit, catch you up on what's been going on, so to speak. And so Moses has led some 2 million Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and they are journeying to the promised land of Canaan. Okay, God has delivered them time and time again. He has provided for them over and over, and they are journeying to the promised land. But in Exodus chapter 19, Moses goes up to Mount Sinai so that God can reveal the law to him. God gives him the 10 Commandments. He reveals instructions on how to build the tabernacle, the place of worship, and how the people can worship and follow him. And he reveals the law to him there at Mount Sinai. And so Moses is up there for 40 days and 40 nights, talking with God, getting these instructions. But in chapter 32, we read about how the Israelites, they get impatient. I don't know about you guys. I get impatient a lot. But the Israelites get impatient, and they go to Aaron, who is Moses' brother, kind of one of his right-hand men, and they're like, Aaron, man, you got to do something. Like Moses says, abandon us, make us a god that we can worship. And so Aaron says, everybody give me all your gold. He melts it down, and he forms this golden calf, and they worship it. They make a sacrifice to it. And so, of course, God sees this, and God warns Moses. He says, you need to go down there and stop them. But, I mean, at this point, God's already really angry, and he's ready to unleash his wrath on this, what he calls stiff-necked people. In other words, stubborn people. And I think that's pretty understandable, right? God has delivered these people out of slavery. He has rescued them from the hands of an angry Pharaoh. He has split the Red Sea so they could walk through it. He's done all this stuff, providing and delivering them over and over, and they turn their back and start to worship another god. And so I think it's pretty understandable that he'd be angry. But Moses, as he does so often, intercedes for the people, and he's begging God to spare them, not to unleash his wrath on them. But because God has favor on Moses, he's like, all right. Moses comes down from the mountain, though. Moses comes down, and he sees the people dancing before this false god, this golden calf. He sees him worshiping this golden calf, and he is furious. He throws the stone tablets on the ground at the bottom of the mountain. They break, they shatter, and he takes this golden calf they made, he burned it, he ground it up into powder, and he put it in the water and forced them to drink it. So Moses goes to Aaron, and he's like, what happened? And I think this is kind of funny. In chapter 32, Aaron's like, basically he just says, I just threw the gold in the fire, and out came this golden calf. It's like, just magic. I don't know what happened. Like, I find it kind of funny, the excuse there from Aaron. But then I have to catch myself and think, how often are we guilty of that too, though, trying to justify and excuse our sin. But nevertheless, there were consequences for these people's sin. About 3,000 of them died because of it. Their names were blotted out of the book of life, and they all suffered this plague because of their sin. But in chapter 33, God tells them they're going to leave Sinai and continue on their journey. But he says, I'm going to send an angel to lead you, because I'm not going to go, because if I did, I would just consume you because you guys are so stubborn. Once again, Moses, he intercedes for the people. He basically pleads with God, saying, God, if you don't go with us, we have nothing. Like, if your presence isn't with us, we have nothing. These are your people. Please, please, please be with us. Go with us. And so I want to read to you God's response and what Moses does next. Next is chapter 33, starting verse 17. The Lord answered Moses, I will do this very thing you have asked, for you have found favor with me, and I know you by name. Then Moses said, please, God, let me see your glory. He said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim the name, the Lord, before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he added, you cannot see my face, for humans cannot see me and live. The Lord said, here's a place near me. You're going to stand on the rock, and when my glory passes by, I will put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away. You will see my back, but my face will not be seen. So, Moses, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So God accepts Moses' plea because he has favor on Moses. And Moses says, God, I get you're saying you're going to be with me, and that's great, but I need to see it. Like, how are these people going to know that it's actually you working through me, not just me? Like, how are they going to know? I need to see it. I need to know so that they can see it and they can know. He says, show me your glory. And God says, if I showed you all of my glory, you wouldn't even live. But I'm going to put you between these rocks, and I'm going to pass by, and you're going to see through a crevice, you're going to see my back as I pass by. You're going to see a glimpse of my glory. Could you imagine this? Like, I've seen celebrities and professional athletes from a distance, and I get like giddy like a little girl, But could you imagine the glory of God, creator of the universe, everything passing by and seeing a glimpse of him? What an honor Moses had here. And in chapter 34, God instructed Moses to make new tablets, and God renews his covenant with them. And in this time, Moses is on Mount Sinai again, alone. And God renews this covenant. But he's up there for 40 days and 40 nights. And during this time, he doesn't eat and he doesn't drink. And look what happens when he comes down. In chapter 34, start in verse 29. Chapter 34. When Moses comes down from the mountain. As Moses descended from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of testimony in his hands, as he descended the mountain, he did not realize that the skin of his face shone as a result of speaking with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face shone. They were afraid to come near him, but Moses called out to them, So Aaron and all the leaders of the community, they returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he commanded them to do everything the Lord had told him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever Moses went before the Lord to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. After he came out, he would tell the Israelites what had been commanded, and the Israelites would see that Moses' face was radiant. Then Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went to speak with the Lord. So Moses, after seeing this glimpse of God's glory, he has this intense communion with God. He's with God for 40 days and 40 nights. And after talking with God for 40 days and 40 nights, being in his presence, uninterrupted, without distractions, he didn't even eat or drink. He was just completely satisfied in God. After this time, he comes down from the mountain, and his face is literally shining. And so Moses' face was shining as a sign for God to say, look, this is actually me speaking through Moses. It was a sign to the people that God was speaking through him. His words, his actions pointed straight to God. See, God was using Moses to say, look, here is my glory reflecting off of Moses' face. You see me through him. You were made for me. This is who I am. I made you. You were made for me. Glorify me. And Moses, when he comes down, he doesn't even know that his face is shining, right? So the people told him, because it was pretty obvious, right? They're like, Moses, something's going on. Your face is like headlights on a car, okay? They didn't know what that was then, but you know what I mean. So they knew something was going on. He didn't even know, okay? But they did. It was obvious. And so when he would speak for God, he would let that shine. But the rest of the time, when it was just Moses talking and he was hanging out, he would put a veil over his face. And he would go back and forth. He would meet with God. When he would meet with God, he would remove the veil, come out, tell the people what God commanded, and then put the veil back over his face again. And time again, he was telling the people what God was saying, and each time, God's glory was reflecting off of Moses. So, let me kind of bring this home a little bit. My challenge for you today is to reflect God's glory to the world around you. Reflect God's glory to the world around you. Let your life be a reflection of God's glory. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 20 says, "For you were bought at a price, so glorify God with your body." And then in chapter 10, verse 31, it says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do everything for the glory of God." See, it sounds simple, right? Do everything for the glory of God. It sounds simple, but how do we actually do this? If we were made for God and our purpose is to glorify God through our lives, how do we make our lives a reflection of God's glory for the world around us to see? I want to point out three things. First is get communion with God. Get communion with God. Moses was able to get completely alone with God without distraction, uninterrupted, and he had this intimate communion with him. Scripture says that he spoke with God like a man speaks to a friend. Communion is sharing and exchanging intimate thoughts and feelings, and it happens through prayer, sharing what's going on in your life with God, seeking him, seeking his ways. It happens through spending time in his word, listening to him speak to you through his word. It's deep connection with God. And the reality is, guys, we cannot expect to display God's glory in our lives if we are not connected to him. In John 15, Jesus talks about how he's the vine. We, his disciples, his followers, are the branches. The branches have no life if they are not attached to the vine. The vine is the source of life. And so any and all fruit that we produce in our lives is a result of being connected to him. And if you're not connected to God, you can try as hard as you want to, but you will never be able to produce real fruit. If you're not connected to him, if you don't have communion with him, your life will never bring him glory. So if you want to fulfill your purpose in life of glorifying God, you have to start with knowing him and making time to have communion with him and having a deep connection to him. So get communion with God to glorify him. Second, find satisfaction in God. Find satisfaction in God. Moses went 40 days and 40 nights without eating or drinking. I can barely go 40 minutes without eating or drinking. I hear an amen out there, right? Probably my wife. Just kidding. Anyway, I'm not going to dig my hole any deeper here. Moses goes 40 days and 40 nights without eating or drinking. And during this time, he probably didn't even sleep. He probably didn't rest. These things, eating, drinking, sleep, things that we consider necessity, he gave up for 40 days. And he probably didn't even realize it, though, to be honest. It probably flew by to him because he was so amazed and infatuated by the presence of God that he didn't need those necessities, okay? His satisfaction was completely in God. And, normally you would think if somebody doesn't eat or drink for 40 days, if they don't sleep, afterward they're going to be looking pretty rough, like some of us in the morning, right? They're going to be looking pretty rough. You'd think Moses comes down from the mountain and he's going to be looking pale, malnourished, but no, he looks better than ever. His face is literally shining because he'd been so satisfied in God's presence. And this is convicting because there are times when we get tired and weary of just a few hours a week of coming to worship and adore God. In those times, we need to check ourselves, think about 40 days of it. More than that, we need to think about the reality of if we get to heaven, that's all we're going to do is adore and worship God. And you may think, that doesn't really sound fun. But if you love something, doesn't it bring you joy to talk about it and praise it? C.S. Lewis says that praising something completes the enjoyment of it. So like for me, I love Alabama football. If you know me, you know I love Alabama football. And I love to talk about it. I love wearing shirts and jerseys and hats and spending money on tickets and memorabilia. I love spending time every Saturday watching them play and then watching ESPN afterwards to watch them talk about how much better they are than Ohio State. Just kidding, Richie. And but I love all of this stuff. I enjoy it. It brings me a lot of joy and entertainment. And if Nick Saban, who is Alabama's head coach, if he walked in here, I would be like flipping out. I would be going crazy. I'd be talking about how awesome he is. I'd be bragging about it to everybody. And you guys know what I mean. Like you laugh. I know I'm not the only one. I know somebody else who their favorite athlete walked by and they screamed, "I love you." I'm not going to tell you his name, but it rhymes with Richie Kybers. But you guys get it, right? Like if Yadier Molina walked in here today, we would be, most of us, many of you would be so excited. You'd be taking pictures. You'd be telling him how awesome he is. You'd be going home telling all your friends, posting on Facebook how awesome Yadier Molina is. You would be so excited. You would get so much joy in just him being here. But when you love something or someone, even though it may be imperfect people, just being with them, talking to them, talking about them, and praising them becomes easy because it fills you with joy. It completes your enjoyment about that thing. So think about this then. If praising imperfect and temporary things can bring us great joy, how much greater of a joy can we experience in praising an infinite, perfect, holy, worthy, loving, and gracious God who has saved us from our sin? How much greater joy can we get in praising him? You see, yes, God did create us to glorify him, but he didn't do this to make us miserable or because he is selfish. He did this knowing that there is nothing else in this world that can satisfy us more than him. Nothing else can bring us more joy and satisfaction than him. Matthew 5:6, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." In Proverbs 19:23 says, "The fear of the Lord leads to life, and whoever has it rests satisfied." In Psalm 107, verse 9, "For he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things." See, the pinnacle of satisfaction in this life is found in him. We can be most satisfied by knowing God and glorifying him with our lives. And it actually kind of goes full circle. John Piper said this, I think it's so true, that God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. When there is nothing in our lives that compares to the joy that we find in him, he is most glorified. In Psalm 90, verse 14 says, "Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, so that we may shout with joy and be glad all our days." What's going to make us shout for joy and be glad all our days? Money, possessions, people? No. Being satisfied in him. And I love that the psalmist says in the morning in here, because in the morning, before you start your day, before you go out into the world where the world's going to throw a million different things at you saying, this is going to satisfy you, this is going to fulfill you, this is going to make you feel good, this is going to make you happy. In the morning, before any of that comes your way, satisfy us, God, in your love. I love that. I encourage you guys to make that verse your prayer. So find your satisfaction in God. And the last thing is to be a light for God. Be a light for God. Make your life a light that displays God's glory. Moses reflected God's glory to the people around him. And if our purpose is to glorify God, then we have this same obligation, this same purpose. Matthew 5:16, one of my favorite verses in Scripture, says, "In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Guys, I don't have to tell you that we live in a dark and a sinful world. But Jesus says that we, his followers, his disciples, are to be a light in this dark world. We are a beacon of light pointing others to God through our good works, through our words, through our actions. And so this means that the goal of my life is to live in such a way that when people know me, they'll look at my life and they'll say, they'll see God. They'll look at my life and they'll say, man, God is amazing. Not Caleb is amazing. God is amazing. That's the goal. But there is an important element of humility that we have to maintain, because it's not about us. Moses, he didn't know that his face was shining. It was, like I said, incredibly obvious to the people around him, but he didn't know. And when he found out, it would have been easy for him to walk around and be like, "Hey, everybody, look at me. God's glory on display right here." Okay? It would have been easy, right? When you've got God's glory literally shining off your face, it would be easy. But in humility, he would cover his face, and he maintained humility throughout all of it. Many Christians, I'm afraid, are doing things for God, but they're not actually doing them for God. They do them for their own glory, for their own praise, their own recognition. And if we're living for the Lord, we aren't doing things for him and serving him for our glory and our recognition. If we are missing the point entirely, and we're actually stealing from him what is rightfully his, that is his glory. We do these things to honor him. And the reality is, people are going to notice, right? When someone is being seriously godly, that puts a shine or a glow on their face that people can't ignore. It demands admiration and affection. But people are going to notice. But we should be so concerned with God getting the glory out of it that we don't even notice, like Moses did. So like Moses, we need to maintain humility as we do this, as we live for the Lord and live to glorify him. However, unlike Moses, we don't put a veil over our face. We aren't called to veil God's glory, but we are called to display it. We never stop reflecting God's glory. So how do we glorify God through our lives? How do we reflect God's glory? Get communion with him. Make time, get alone, and get real with God. Experience daily communion with him. Experience his presence, his glory, so that you in turn can reflect it to the world. And find your satisfaction in him. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. Maybe you're here today and you've been seeking satisfaction through all the wrong things. You're looking for satisfaction in money or in a career, in pleasure, in entertainment, in some sin in your life. Listen, I've been there. If that's you, though, understand that seeking satisfaction in anything other than God is always going to fall short. It is never going to fully satisfy or fulfill you or fill this void in your life. Maybe you're here and you've never given your life to God. You've never made him Lord of your life and accepted his gift of salvation. If that's you, if you've been searching for some void or something to fill this void in your life, the only thing that's going to bring true fulfillment and satisfaction in life is a relationship with God and accepting his purpose for your life, that is living to glorify him. And lastly, be a light for him. If you claim to be a Christian, honestly ask yourself, are you being a light for God? Do people look at you and see God through you? Does your life outside of these walls, your words, your actions, do they point others to God? Does it bring him glory? If not, what needs to change to make that happen? I'm going to ask Richie to go ahead and come up. We're going to have an invitation in a moment, but maybe you've been there before. You've had those mountaintop experiences with God, and you've come back shining brightly for him, but you've let that light grow dim. You've put a veil over it, so to speak. Listen, come back to God. Maybe there's a difficult situation. You're walking through the hardest thing you've ever had to walk through in your life. You're in a season of difficulty, and you have shifted your focus from God to you and to the pain that you're experiencing or the challenges, whatever it might be. If that's the case, listen, what better opportunity for God to get glory than through a difficult situation, through a difficult season? It is in those moments that we can most glorify God by leaning in his strength and look the world see us and say, man, there's something different about him, that he can go through that and still be glorifying and praising God. Listen, come back to God. Get communion with him, get real with him, connect with him again, and fulfill your God-given purpose of glorifying him. And go back into the world when you leave this place, shining bright for him again. Let him use that difficulty for his glory. Whatever it is, whatever need, we're going to open the altar today, and if you need to respond, I ask that you would.